You know the exact moment it hits. It is usually around 2 p.m. Your reading comprehension drops, attention frays, and subtle errors start creeping into work you could normally do on autopilot. Most people assume this is a discipline problem. Ambitious professionals in particular tend to categorize this afternoon fatigue as a failure of their own willpower, a sign they just aren't focusing hard enough. This diagram maps the theoretical baseline that drives most office cultures. The assumption is that cognitive output remains completely linear. You sit at your desk at 9 a.m., maintaining a perfectly flat, high-level line of effort until 5 p.m. But if we overlay actual human biology onto that assumption, the reality sharply deviates. By the 2 p.m. mark, your actual cognitive capacity degrades. The modern hustle narrative equates visible, continuous grinding with professional value. So instead of adjusting, you push through. You force the effort, which creates massive internal friction. Equating continuous output with professional value is a cultural trap that actively ignores human physiological limits. Because of that pressure to remain visible, taking a deliberate rest in the middle of the day feels like an admission of defeat to the ambitious professional. We tend to override fatigue with continuous cognitive friction, staring at screens or typing harder, rather than implementing a clean reset. Applying more effort to an already fatigued nervous system does not restore your baseline cognition. It only drives up your error rate and makes the work take twice as long. Strategic napping is a highly constrained performance tool. It is built directly into many high-output operating rhythms because the human body has specific maintenance requirements. The stigma surrounding a midday rest is cultural. There is no biological science or performance data that supports the idea of powering through a degraded state. Reframing the midday nap changes it from a professional taboo to a calculated method of managing your output. To understand why this happens, look at the underlying mechanism, a 24-hour physiological baseline. That early afternoon drop is the circadian trough. Notice how deep the trough is compared to the metabolic peak of the late morning. When you experience this drop in focus, you are fighting baseline biology. You are not experiencing a sudden lack of internal stamina. During your peak morning hours, your brain operates with high metabolic efficiency. By the time you hit the circadian trough, the energy demands required to process identical information are significantly higher. Forcing linear output during this trough without any recovery strips the system. It degrades your decision-making and slows your executive function. When we ignore this reality, we inevitably reach for coping mechanisms that are counterproductive. Treating a biological certainty as a psychological weakness guarantees diminished returns on your professional effort. Look at these 3 timelines diverging from the bottom of the trough. These represent the default interventions people attempt instead of stepping away. The first is late afternoon coffee. You get a sharp, artificial spike, followed immediately by a steep crash. Caffeine consumed late in the day does not actually create new energy. It strictly borrows it from your upcoming sleep cycles, guaranteeing you will be tired again tomorrow. The second intervention is the scrolling break. You step away from work but scroll rapidly on a phone. The timeline shows tiny microspikes that fail to elevate the baseline. A superficial dopamine spike triggered by an algorithm differs from true physiological recovery. Your attention network is still doing heavy lifting. The third is skipping lunch and brute forcing through the friction. The line slowly drags downward. Powering through a fatigued state actively worsens your cognitive deficit. Your output quality degrades, and mistakes multiply. Collectively, relying on these methods creates a localized accumulation of cognitive debt. You owe the system rest, and you are paying the interest in lost focus. These interventions fail because they mask the biological signal instead of satisfying the requirement. The optimized alternative to those false interventions is a deliberate, time-constrained reset that sweeps the system back to a zeroed baseline. The clinical benefits of this reset are highly documented. It provides acute, temporary improvements in reaction time and restores sustained attention for the remainder of the afternoon. This hypnogram maps the mechanism. You descend from awake into stage N1, then stage N2 sleep, stopping abruptly before deep sleep. That hard stop is the constraint. The rest must be capped between 10 to 20 minutes, creating a barrier against slow-wave sleep. If you breach that 20-minute barrier, you trigger sleep inertia. That is the heavy, groggy state that ruins your productivity for the rest of the day. This tactical bridge is meant for acute, localized recovery. It is not a replacement for inadequate nighttime sleep. If we remove the cultural baggage of the word napping, what you are actually doing is deploying a highly calibrated, targeted block of physiological recovery. Managing your internal state is complex, and individual biological responses to short naps vary significantly. Some people follow the strict 20-minute constraint perfectly and still wake up feeling slightly groggy. To bypass grogginess, some use the coffee nap hack. You consume a shot of espresso immediately before a 15-minute recline. Caffeine takes time to metabolize, so the physiological convergence happens precisely when your alarm sounds, as caffeine binds to your receptors. The evidence on this specific hack is mixed. It is highly dependent on your individual caffeine tolerance, so if you try it, experiment carefully. Specific protocols require personal tuning, but the objective remains the same. Localized recovery will always outperform compounding friction. To translate this into a practical routine, we zoom out to the standard professional workweek. Start with a simple constraint. Select exactly 3 weekdays to test this protocol and establish a consistent post-lunchtime slot. The operational rules are rigid. You set a strict phone alarm for 15 minutes. That alarm is your enforcement barrier against sleep inertia. Next, manage the physical environment. Remove visual stimulus entirely by darkening the room or pulling an eye mask taut. Your only job is to recline with your eyes closed. Achieving actual sleep is secondary. The physiological rest of closing your eyes and halting visual processing does the heavy lifting. Track your subjective focus through the afternoon. You are looking for a general signal of improved clarity and reduced friction rather than absolute perfection. If you notice that a midday reset starts disrupting your nighttime sleep architecture, the troubleshooting step is immediate. Shorten the duration, or move the slot earlier in the day. Attempting to optimize a biological system without respecting its limits is a failure of analytical thinking. Internal state management is a critical operational skill for ambitious professionals. Fighting the afternoon trough with caffeine and willpower is the mark of an amateur operating system. Try the 15-minute protocol, 3 days this week, post-lunch, with an alarm and an eye mask. Treat this practice strictly as equipment maintenance, not laziness. If you take one thing from this, schedule those sessions and objectively measure the impact on your afternoon focus.